Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. On Sundays, I'm doing this series on 4 functions or 4 systems. This has been quite an ambitious undertaking because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to speak out the deepest ideas that I have. And each week I project the most ambitious things I can accomplish in a week. And then I try to kind of work on that throughout the week. And then I talk about it that week. I don't know what I'm going to do next week. It kind of depends on today. So at the end of the day today, I will say, okay, what's the most ambitious thing I can do? So we've gone zigzag in multiple directions. We've gone and looked at all the ideas that were extremely popular in our 4 years of meetup history, tried to incorporate them. Last week, we had John talk about his ideas on health and tried to integrate that. Today, I'm doing something even more ambitious. What I'm doing is that I'm going to take the how-to angle today about how I actually use it. Again, I'm telling you how I'm using the system, the 4-function system. And I'm going to compare that to 2 other systems. One is called the OODA Loop, and one is called Ray Dalio's 5-step process. Okay, so first I'm going to just focus on the 4 systems, or I call it 4 systems cycle. So as an introduction, the 4 systems, it's basically a take on Jung's ideas and Daniel Kahneman's ideas of psyche and trying to extend it to the external world, the social world, fully. So they were mostly focused on the psyche. They, of course, talked about the external world. You can't talk about psyche without it. But what I'm doing is that I'm extending it to the external world. So today is particularly interesting because the 2 systems I've chosen to compare it with are very much of external world systems. So one comes from military science. That is John Boyd's OODA Loop. And one comes from the business world, and that is Ray Dalio's 5-step process that he uses in his company. He's been using that for many years. OODA Loop has been extremely successful in transforming the military. So both these are extremely effective ideas. OODA Loop at a much larger scale than Ray Dalio's ideas. But Ray Dalio's ideas also, it has transformed his large company, Bridgewater. So, and both these folks are focused on transforming the external world. So to try to compare their cycles with the cycle that I have, which comes mostly from psyche, it's a good challenge. And so that's what we're going to do, okay? So first point I want to make is that the basic idea here of all these three cycles is that there are many things that we need to do in order to be effective. We are complex beings, and there are many things we need to hit and many things we need to get right for everything to work. And the idea of separating a cycle into multiple parts, 4 or 5 or 3, whatever, or 2, is to make sure you're covering all bases. You're hitting all the things that you need to be focused on. Okay, so that's the purpose of the cycle. So what I'm going to do, so first, one point I want to make is about the frequency of cycles. How quickly do you go through the cycle? Okay, my cycle, I'm starting with the week as a base, and then I'm trying to extend it both outside and inside. I think it is scalable, but I'm using week as a base. For example, I'm doing these meetups using the same cycle, okay? So at the end of today, I'm going to visualize what's the most, let me go ahead and put up the cycle so that becomes easy to talk about. All right, here you go. Can you guys see the diagram? Can somebody say, okay, all right, very good. So what I do is, so I want to start with my example. So what I do in the beginning of the week, or at the end of today's meetup, sometime this evening, I will say, what do I visualize as the best possible extension of this 4-function model or 4-systems model within a week. What is it? What's the most ambitious thing I can possibly do? Okay. Then I explicate about it. I talk about it. Can I actually do this? What are the issues involved? What are the alternative goals or visions I can have? Which of them is better? Sometimes I will talk it out with friends. So that's the explication. Then I come up with a plan. Okay, how am I going to do this? So for example, in this case, I decided that I wanted to present it as a cycle. That's okay, what's the best way of presenting it as a cycle? So first I will describe it. And the best vision that best idea that I got was to compare it to other cycles. So there are people who are going to be familiar with other cycles. I am more familiar with each of those cycles than my own, things I'm putting together. So it allows me to systematically compare and see what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what can I learn, how do they compare? What is it that makes those cycles work, and how is it, are those elements operative and in my cycle? So are there some advantages that the other cycles have? What are my disadvantages? So it allows me to systematically compare that. So I thought that this was a great way of actually, working on the cycle. And throughout the week, I've been working on it. Then action is right now. I'm actually implementing it right now. And in the process, I'm going to take the feedback, not only to improve what I'm saying about the cycles, but I'm going to use this material to project the next goal. So that's the way in which I'm using it on a weekly basis. Okay. The same thing can be done in a shorter time frame. Think of these meetups and my 4 rules. Okay. The 4 rules that most of you are familiar with. When I say keep on topic, when we say keep on topic, what we're saying is that we are here to do something. That's our vision. That's our goal. Focus on that. That's kind of, saying this is the goal. That's visualizing. This is what we are trying to do. If everybody is focused on that, we can get a lot more done. The second question on explication, the rule is that feel free to speak your mind. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything, but do so courteously. So these are the rules for making sure that the explication, the actual mechanics of how people talk to each other work well. Okay. The third one is design. There, I've kind of boiled it down to simple time. Be brief. The time is limited. We have got 2 hours and we've got 50 people. The only way we are going to be able to do things productively is if everybody is brief. So that's that rule. An act is finally, what do? You just raise your hand in Zoom or type exclamation mark when you want to speak, wait for your turn to speak. So that's a way in which I can apply it, and I think that's a much better presentation of my rules than I've had before, thanks to just applying these ideas. And it becomes very clear why we are doing it at each step, what we are trying to do. So it motivates, okay, I'm going to actually make some progress on this topic. Okay, so that vision is there, common shared vision, which makes amazing things possible. The principles of discourse are very clear, that we respect each other, we want each other to speak their mind. We at the same time, we should feel free to disagree with each other, because that's the way we are going to learn, and we're doing it courteously. So that is that part. Design is simply in terms of time, because that's where things can really, really go wrong. And then the action is a very simple kind of mechanism so that people can line up to execute all of this. Okay, so that's an example of this cycle applied to the meetup rules. All right. Now, what I'm going to suggest to you is to actually work on this. Okay, this is the only way to learn it. So what I'm going to bring up now is I'm going to bring up a 4x4 matrix. I'm going to give me just a second. This is just done roughly in my in the whiteboard using my mouse pad, so it doesn't look very pretty. So can you see the grid? Okay, so I recommend that please go ahead and get a pen and a paper, because pen and paper is far more effective than any electronic media. And come up, just draw this grid, a 4x4 grid. So on the top is the, visualize, explicate, design, and act. And on the vertical axis, I want you to choose 4 things that you want to work on, because I want to actually show you how this thing works. Okay. I recommend hitting different areas of your life. So these are the 4 areas that I see in my life. One is personal growth, of being a better person, improving my mind, intellectual growth, moral growth, all of that. So that's personal growth. So choose a topic from personal growth, something that you want to do. The second one would be career, what you want to do, something specific in a career. You can have these goals over multiple times. It could be a 2-year, it could be like a 5-year goal, or it could be a 1-week goal. It doesn't matter. Okay. Deliberately, I'm choosing different ideas. So some of them, you may be able to see things more clearly than others. The next one would be family and friends, your personal relationships. What do you want to do? What you would like to do there? And the last one is health. So what this does is that it covers 4 different areas. Now, each of you should pick something, a goal that matters to you. Okay. You can look at it at a very large level of saying, okay, what do I need to do with my health? Or you can say, okay, I need to lose so many pounds. Or you can say, I want to improve my relationship with my daughter, something like that. So you can choose at any level. So those are the specific things. So what I find, the way I work on this thing is that I use these matrices and I fill them out. What I find is that for me, what I'm saying is that each person's mind works differently. So this is a way of saying everything that needs to happen. What will happen is that some of these things are going to be very easy for you. So for example, I'm really good at visions of saying, okay, what is important? What is it that I need to do? That one is very easy for me. The most difficult for me is to design a plan for it. I'm terrible at it, relatively. Okay. So let me again go through these 4 things, visualize, and talk about the products that you're looking for. So visualize, explicate, design, and act are functions, are actions. Okay. What are the products? So visualize, you're trying to produce visions or goals. That's what is worthwhile. Okay. That's what is worthwhile based on everything that I know and feel. That's what I think is worthwhile. Okay. Explication, and this is a very complex point, so I'll just make it very briefly. Explication is all about kind of talking it out, making sure that it is consistent, applying all the standards. But really, and I will go into this in detail at some point. I think really the heart of it is principles. Okay, what principles are you going to operate based on? Based on everything that you know about the world and yourself, your mind, what are the principles by which you're going to operate on this? The function of design, the end results of them are plans. So we've got visions, principles, plans, and act is simply actions. So you can look at the actions that you're taking and saying, okay, for my health, this is what I do, or this is what I need to do. So those are the actions. In case of health, let's say, suppose I'm saying that, okay, I need to lose weight, right? Let me give you an actual example. So for health, my greatest vision is to work with the body as it has evolved. That I think is the greatest vision I have, or greatest idea I have about how to proceed with health. On design, I would have separate things like, waking up in the, earlier in the morning, doing maybe meditation, walking. I have stuff on my diet, things like that. Or kind of things like focus on movement when whatever I'm doing, just paying attention to the movement and just taking the feedback from the body and improve. So there are various ways. And what the beautiful thing about mapping this out in this grid is that you will find, at least I find, that okay, for some of these things I have very clear vision. Some of these I don't have clear vision. If you don't have a clear vision, you're not going to be able to do much. For some of these things, I already have a plan, very good plan. So for my health, I have a very decent plan. And it works most of the time. So then it's a question of just, kind of acting. So I have a good vision. I have that principles. I have it kind of a little bit vague, but okay. On some of these things, I will not have vision. Some of these, or I or anybody will. So this is a way of saying, okay, where am I right now? And whatever you don't have worked out, you can keep, you can keep it blank, or you can put a cross so it kind of catches your attention. And so you can work on multiple things. But this is just 4 things that I put in. I recommend not working on too many things at once, but it depends on your mind. You can actually work on as many things as you want, but this is a kind of a flexible system of running through the cycle. So that's what I use. Let me go ahead and bring back the other diagram. And I'm going to open it up for questions. I've got only one more thing to say. Then I'm going to open it up for questions. And then I'm going to start comparing it to OODA Loop next. So, okay, so I brought up the diagram. Can you guys see the diagram? Yeah? Okay. So the other thing, and this is kind of based on—
I can't see it.
You can't see it?
No, sir.
Well,
Okay,
it's too big.
It's too big? Okay, let me see. Give me just a second. I don't know what happened.
All I can see is 4 function cycle, and then
Yeah,
it's
the
black.
four function cycle. That's it. That's what I want.
Yeah, but
Only
we
the
can't see
title
those
is visible.
actual cycles. That's
Oh,
You can see
really?
the words at the very
Just
top.
the title.
Okay, okay. All right. Folks, it is, let me see what's happened here. Give me a second. Hold on. Okay. All right. Okay, can you see it now? Yeah? Okay. Sorry about that.
Yep.
So now the other point I want to make is this comes directly from Carl Jung's work on psychological functions. You have to know yourself. You have to, there are some things you're going to be strong at, some things you're going to be weak at. And it's always good to know that. So you have to identify which of these things, are you very good at visualizing things? Are you very good at explicating things? Are you very good at designing things in space and time and people, exactly what you need to, or planning? Are you very good at carrying execution of the actions? To what extent are you good? What is it that you excel at? What is it that is holding you back? So that is very, very useful to say, what are your strong suits? What are your weak suits? So for me, I'm very strong at visualization. I'm very strong at execution. I am decent at explication. I'm not very good at communication. And I'm worst at kind of planning. So that's the, relatively, and it's all relative. It's not relative to other people, because no matter how, suppose somebody is very, very good, if they have a weaker side, they should know that, because what we're trying to do is that we are not actually trying to pretend to be great. We are actually trying to do good things, So it is, so I would strongly recommend that you evaluate yourself of saying, of these 4 things, what's my number 1? What's my number 2? What's my number 3? What's my number 4? So what's my strongest? What's my weakest? That's the easiest way to start. And then say, okay, what's the second after that one? And so that's, and we can, I'm on this issue, I'm going to go into a far greater detail on a later meetup. All right, so this was a very quick overview of this. Let's see how far we have gotten. Okay, about about 20 minutes, I think. All right, so I'm now going to open it up for questions. It's very difficult for me to judge how much I'm able to communicate, whether something is clear or not. So please feel free to ask any questions you have. So we'll start with Jim. Jim, go ahead. Jim, we can't hear you.
All right, yeah, I was pushing a button to unmute and I ended up doing some weird thing with my camera. There we go.
Yes.
So your diagram doesn't label the vertices corresponding to each process. So it's not clear steps 1 through 5. Where
okay, let me just bring that up again. Yeah.
I'm guessing the 5-step process starts in visualize, but it doesn't actually say that.
Which one? Yeah, the 4-step. Yeah, 4-step process starts with like visualize. That again, that's a very good point. Okay, now I don't know. I mean, I think for me, it definitely starts with visualize, explicate, design, and act. But there are people who are different in the sense that for them, they might be able to start with something else. I don't know how, but for me, the best, as I understand it, it always starts with visualize. Okay, but I will be open to anybody saying, no, I have certain designs that I've already formed about what I need to do. And I use that as a base. I act, then I kind of revisualize it, I explicate it, and it's always, I start with design. Okay, so for me, I always start with visions, and then I'm doing all of this and I'm updating the vision. So it's like, it's the point that we made when we're talking about the idea of introvert and extrovert. So introvert is somebody who has kind of an inner idea of what is, they have an inner sense, and they always start with that. They go out to the world to find something, and they come back and enrich it. So it's a cycle that starts from inside, goes out, and comes back. For me, actually, this is a 5-step cycle. Though it is a 4-function cycle, it's visualize, explicate, design, act, and revisualize. So only when I revisualize it, the process is done. So when, for example, when this meetup is over, I have to reintegrate everything to form a new vision of what I talked about. And only then it is complete. So it's, in that sense, in the way I see it, it's 5-step process. So it's visualize, explicate, design, act, and revisualize.
My question is simpler than that. I don't have Ray's 5-step process memorized. So
oh no, we're not talking about Ray yet. We're not talking about Ray yet.
Okay.
We're not even
talking about, okay. You're not,
yeah, what I'm presenting right now is just my idea. Then I'm going to talk about John Boyd's OODA loop, and we'll go into details, and I'll explain everything. I wanted to keep this simple so that the focus remains on the 4-function cycle, and then I'm going to go through each of those processes and explain that.
Okay.
Next up is Joe, and then Deborah.
So I'm trying to figure this out for myself, so forgive me if I'm a little unclear. The idea of explicate is setting up a group of principles, right? So wouldn't that be prior to your goals? Because you have to have the principles by which you're going to govern yourself by, and then you set up your goal, and then you can kind of work within that system.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is that, see, that's what I'm unsure about, like the starting points, because as I was saying, there are people who can use design as a start point. There are people who will use principles as a start point. That's what virtue ethics is about. You start with that, with certain principles that you are trying to live by. Then you so the cycles. But the point I'm making is that you have to hit all those 4 areas. You can't really live without all the 4. But I think, I mean, this is a deep insight of Carl Jung, and the entire kind of personality theory is based on that, of saying that people have kind of different functions, which is their primary function, which is their hero function. So, so for example, there are people who would have explicate as a hero function. Like people like Jordan Peterson are definitely, I think, in that category. There are people for whom acting is a fundamental principle. It's not fundamental, but it's like it's the first function, or it's their hero function. That is their go-to function. They always start with that. And then the other functions kind of support that. There are functions that guide it. There are functions. So I'm not saying, I'm just simply saying that this is how I think in this cycle. All four need to be done. Look at, work out the system, work out the matrix, and give me feedback on how you are seeing it. Okay, so that's, but I think these four things are needed. And I just don't know, go ahead.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely needed. I'm just thinking about the sequencing of them, because, where I look at almost Explicate as a universal, and the rest are particulars in if you're thinking in philosophical terms of how they would operate underneath that set of principles. So that's the only reason why I was thinking of that a little bit differently.
Sure, no, I understand. So what I'm saying is that different people will see it differently. So in terms of particulars and universals, in a sense, visualize is the implicit version of putting things together. It's kind of wordlessly right brain way of doing that. Explicate is the left brain way, kind of deliberate way of doing that. It's a system 2 way of doing that.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And people are going to be different in terms of that. So that's partly what, I mean, the fundamental thing I'm saying is that you have to have all these four things. I'm also saying that there is variation from person to person about which of them actually operates first. Just like introversion and extroversion, you have to have the subject and the object. You have to have your inner experience and the outer world. You have to touch both of them. It's just a question of which order you touch it and how it actually operates in you. So I'm saying that there are cycles. I'm saying that these are the four elements of the cycle. And I'm also saying that there is a variation possible in the sequence. And I have not fully worked out. It's better for me to be honest about what is happening in me, and then let other people like you talk about how it is different. And then I would somehow figure out a way of putting it in more general terms. I'm still away from that. Make sense?
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next one is Deborah, followed by Shelley.
Okay, it's very timely that you're coming up with this discussion, because I told you I was grading papers right now, so I'm looking at my students' writing, and the analogy is with what you're doing. So we do something called backwards planning. So if anyone wants to look it up, you could Google it. And it's been a concept in teaching for decades now. And so what you do is you have the end in mind. So I'm looking at my students' writing, and I'm thinking, okay, it's not where I want it to be. How can I get it where I want it to be? And so you have the end in mind when you're planning. And so let me use instead a more example that you guys can relate to more. John talks a lot about fitness, so I'll use his example. So you could say, where do I want to be with my fitness? So you start with your result. What do I want my result to be? And then the second step is, what evidence will I have?
Deborah, let me interrupt for a second. See, this is a very complex presentation where we're trying to present my system and two other systems. I don't want to introduce a third system, which might confuse people. Okay, I would be happy to talk to you offline. Let's do that in the breakout meeting.
Sure.
Then I will give a summary of that. Whatever you're saying, I will map it all. Just like I'm mapping this one, I will go ahead and map what you have. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, because it seemed like people were confused, and there's just a really basic one with losing weight that makes it more concrete.
Sure. So what I'll do is I'll listen to what you have, and I will map it as soon as we come back for our takeaways.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. Next is Shelley, followed by Adrian.
Hey, Shrikant. So I have a couple of comments. One is, I think there's this to me speaks to me, the process that you do it, right? So my mom once gave me the highest compliment I think anyone's ever given me. She says, you get more done in one day than anybody I know. But I follow exactly what you do, right? So I visualize, I'm a huge goal setter. I think it out, I talk it out. I'm very verbal. It helps me to talk things out. It helps me to solidify the direction I'm going in. Then I get my plan and then I act, right? So I think it would be interesting. And I'm not saying that there isn't other ways. Maybe you do talk with Explicate, right? Or maybe you start with acting. But I wonder if there would be a way to look at this when you begin to convey this to large audiences on, here's all the ways, but here's the most efficient way, right? This personality type that gets things done does it this way because, and the reason I'm saying this is because my mom has spent her whole life bemoaning that she doesn't get as much done as I do, and she's not efficient, and it's not natural for her. And I thought, God, she had this right here to apply because it's very concrete, right? It's step one, you visualize it, right? Get your goal in mind, get your dream, what you're reaching for, either just today or in 2 years, and then work through the process. But it would be also interesting to hear how other people do use it starting at other points, and if it's as efficient as starting with a goal in mind, your vision. So those are my comments.
Okay, Shali, that's beautiful comment. I love that. I love that. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do in this. So I'm just presenting this one, and I'm going to do 2 different versions of it by, John Boyd and by Ray Dalio. And then actually, I would love to have a conversation with everybody of saying, okay, how does it work in you? And just people can just talk about how they operate and how they see it, because there is enough data that each person has. And I do think that there are kind of personal differences in people in terms of personalities, but also think that there are consequences of each of the differences. So if you start with action, you're limited by some things. If you start with, so for each of them, like if you start with visions, you're limited by some things. So there is all kinds of things. There is a power for each of them, and it would be good to kind of map out what are the trade-offs. I'm thinking not just purely in terms of efficiency. I'm thinking in terms of trade-offs, because what happens is different things matter to different people too. And also the other part of it is, which Ray Dalio does very well, is to say, okay, even if different people are operating in different ways, how do we work together effectively? So it's like, how do you come up with a system where everybody is using kind of what they are naturally most effective at doing, and the total throughput is amazingly high. So it's exactly along the same lines that you're thinking of, but I'm going to do it, in a very systematic way, because I think this is very complex. I want to hear as much about different, how people are operating in order to slowly kind of put it together.
So then, yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because for me, I'm very much motivated by efficiency in my whole life. Like everything I do is about being efficient. And so I would really be interested in hearing someone who is motivated differently and where they start on this and how they process through. That would really be interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, just to kind of address it very quickly, I mean, efficiency, there are many people who are motivated by different things. So like their primary motivation can be very different. So for some people, it is kind of peace of mind of having the idea that, the peace of mind as like the ruling thing. And for some people, it is kind of almost like it's very close. They have almost an aesthetic value that they get from action, to what is a right action, what is a beautiful action. And they that is like their root place from which they even view efficiency. So it's like all of these are values, but the way in which people are seeing, so what I'm saying is there is tremendous variation of primary values that are being held by people, again, all of them have consequences. So people will say, look, this is what I care about, and I'm willing to make this trade-off. So let's, but your point is very well taken, and that's exactly along the lines in which I'm going to go. Next up is going to be Adrian, Jeff, and John. Adrian,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes, if I apply it to the way of how cognitive function works, in my understanding, is that some people have a dominant function, some people have the second function, third function, and the fourth function, which would be kind of like the weakness function or the shadow function. For me, it would be visualization would be my dominant function, because I'm like a visualizer. I'm kind of like intuitive, so I'm like more great at visualizing. But my weakness would be like acting, would be my shadow function, because like knowing but doing is a different thing. I have seen people who's like action people. They don't really think about thoughts. They just do it. And then they figure out the stuff later, and they like have like realization of something when they do it, and then it will just pop up in their mind like revelations. When they do something, they understand the process, the step from doing. But for me, I would usually visualize first, and then design, and then explicate. Explicate is a little bit difficult for me because it's like working out a problem. And for example, like for me, somebody who's not really great at math, so like doing that kind of like step by step and working out the problem would be a little bit hard for me. And I really like the grid that you showed us earlier about the different areas in our lives that we can work on. For example, personal growth, career, family and friends, and health. And in those areas, I like how you break it down to the 4 steps that we might have like for each area of our lives, we might process information differently. For example, for career, maybe it's someone who's like, for example, like personal growth.
Adrian, let's not go into the details now. What I'm going to do, I'm going to have everybody do is that everybody will be able to work on those things in the breakout rooms. And then we will come back, and then so everybody will be able to discuss it, having discussed it, you know, amongst each other. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. But good, very good points. And all of, I'm very familiar with all of, you know, Carl Jung's work on this, and the, you know, Myers-Briggs and all of that. And I'm trying to apply it in a much more simpler way. Instead of 8 functions, I'm using just 4. And so it's a different division of things, which I think captures, I think it captures more, and it is easier to use. And I'm trying to integrate with other things, especially externalized things, to make sure that that's the case.
Yeah,
Next
I know
up
where you're
is
trying
Jeff.
to get at, because like from each area, there's different steps in, you know, to work with. And I would love to elaborate more on that. But maybe
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I'm doing. I mean, this entire series is about that. But I'm doing it kind of step by step. So at some point, I'm going to integrate this with, you know, especially I want to integrate it with the concept of archetypes that Jung has. So I'm, you know, we're going to do that. But today we are going to focus on these cycles. So next up is Jeff, followed by John.
So Shrikant, I'll keep it very short here. So I actually think that your addition of revisualizing is very, very important, because my experience, both with myself and others, is what all of us are constantly doing is revisualizing. In other words, we're looking at the example, we're looking at the results of whatever we visualized and how it played out in our explication. We're explicating, and that forces us to slightly revisualize as we evaluate it. We're designing, and that leads to discovery of other principles. We might even begin by acting or by evaluating the results of some action, and that leads to a revisualization of what we actually want. We thought we wanted one thing, we see the results here, and we're revisualizing. So I think that we're always starting from and in all four of those things as we're iterating. And I think it's that iteration that is a significant part of the middle, where everything is always going on.
That's fantastic, Jeff. Really great. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just add this to the whiteboard itself. So folks, when you make that matrix, just go ahead and add one more column for it, because that's actually how I use it. I always use it as a 5-step process, because you have an initial vision and you work on it so your vision is greater. And that's a kind of a natural consequence of that. So I don't have it here. Let me just see what happened here. Where is this? I don't know if whiteboard is going to show what I had before. Yeah, there it is. So what I recommend is that you go ahead and add another one here like this. All right. And this would be like V prime here. And this is this is a great point. The point is that you always say, okay, with my personal growth, this is the vision. And by the time you go through and come up with the action, Shelly is smiling. And so that's exactly what it is. Like, you have a goal, right? And by the time you get done with kind of going through the processes, you have a greater goal. That's the whole purpose. And that's the cycle where you kind of, and this is the idea of Ray Dalio too. You have ambitious goals. And once you have had that, you have to project the next ambitious goal. And that projecting of the next ambitious goals almost comes as the last step of this first cycle. So Jeff, great point, absolutely. Let me see, who's next? Okay, next up is John. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my comments are pretty similar to Jeff's. I sort of like the fact that the beginning and the end isn't so well defined, because sort of, as was said, depending on who you are, that may be different. But also I think even in the same person, depending on the situation you're dealing with, that may be different. And so I kind of, an image came to my mind of somewhat like a 4-stroke engine in a way, where like you're sort of giving it a push to get it started. And like the first loops are really just the electric motor sort of getting the, getting those, that cycle of combustion and exhaust and feedback going. And another thing comes to mind is that this is like, seems like a spiral in a way, right?
It is.
You don't really come back to the same point. In 2 dimensions, you are in the same point, or in maybe in 3 dimensions, but in 4 dimensions, you're always ahead. So,
absolutely, great point. It's this. The spiral is the shape of this, because you're always coming to the next level. So both Jeff and John, I fully agree with it. So what I think we should do is that before going on, I think everybody has made this great point about kind of similarities and differences of where you start, what your strengths are. So I'm going to open it up for people to just comment on their, where do they see this loop starting for themselves? Instead of doing the breakout rooms, this is a manageable number of people. I think we can just do it here. And so what we're going to do is that we're going to have a discussion on these various, on these 4 functions of saying, where do you start? What is your strongest function? Where do you start these loops whenever you start working on something? And where does it, so any ideas on that? So we'll have a brief discussion about that. And then we will go into mapping the OODA loop and Ray Dalio's cycle onto this. So I can just call on people, or you can, if you want to, go ahead. John, go ahead. John, you're welcome to make as much comments as you want to. I know you know this stuff Well,
Well, I could carry on ad nauseum, but I am wanting to keep it simple. And you know, I always go racing up to astronomical high levels, and some people follow me and some people don't, and that's okay. But I mean, I could carry on and give examples, but I don't think I'm going to go there right now. I might do that in a breakout if there's an opportunity. But I'm cross-referencing this, as I always do, against my understanding of Jung's principles, because I've drilled those for so long. And my understanding of your mapping here is that visualize, for the most part, concerns intuition,
yes.
and design, for the most part, concerns sensation.
Yes.
And then act, for the most part, concerns feeling, and explicate, for the most part, designs thinking.
Absolutely.
The one thing that I think I find, again, is that Jung made the distinction, I've said this before, Jung makes the distinction between the rational functions, which would be act and explicate, and the irrational or non-rational functions, which would be visualize and design. And again, for people who don't live and breathe this stuff, even though visualize and design or intuition and sensation may be non-rational, that means to some extent that they're not necessarily linear. And it also means, but a person can be very disciplined about sensation. A fine artist, a fine cook can be extremely accomplished in doing something. But that doesn't mean that it's unsystematic or crazy. I mean, it can be crazy too, and that can be good sometimes. So the point here is that I find that there's always the most direct feedback, instantaneous feedback, between act and explicate and between visualize and design. To the extent that once you touch on one, the other one is going to start quivering and influence what you do somehow. So in terms of your diagram, your matrix diagram, I kind of like the idea of some, again, this risks getting it way too complicated, but I kind of like the idea of the feedback loop between your two intermediate functions and your two outside functions, because the way you've got it pictured, then that might be meaningful. Anyway, I'm just
no.
rambling,
John, I want to make sure I understand it clearly. So what you're saying, feedback between what and what? Can you?
Well, if you go to,
shall I go ahead and bring up the diagram?
What I did. Yeah, you can go ahead and bring up the diagram.
Okay.
and just say it that way. Is the diagram, I'm thinking more of your matrix, your matrix diagram,
Yep.
your Veda diagram,
Mm-hmm.
and that implies, at least in the way it was set up, it implies a kind of a sequence of to start with V, then go to E, then go to D, then go to A. And I think this will be clear with the matrix diagram. But I think that at each stage, once you cross the border from one phase into the next, there's always a little bit of a feedback with the prior stage.
Got it.
And before you really move forward.
Got it.
And that may be so that by the time you get to the third stage, there might be feedback to both stages 1 and 2, before you go to 4. So that's a little bit,
Okay.
you know, maybe too complicated, but I think that, and I could give examples and then it would be much more clear, but for the sake of just
Sure.
throwing something out there,
Sure.
that's what I'm thinking of at the moment.
Sure. Absolutely. So I will go ahead and, you know, think about this. All these, you know, all these comments, I'm listening very carefully, and I'm going to try to incorporate it in some way. I'm going to think about it and, you know, do that. So what we're discussing now is how do these various functions work in you? So far, Shelley and Adrian have described how they work in them, but next one up is Jim, Mark, and Joe. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I always start and visualize. So I develop ideas, visions. I'm a daydreamer too, but even in my professional life in software development, we start and visualize. And the thing in software is acting is kind of expensive if you get it wrong. And so keying off something Jeff said, you know, we start and visualize, explicate, back to visualize, explicate some more, then to design, then back to visualize, explicate, design, visualize. And we have this, you know, limited loop, but we're not acting yet. We're not putting the code in the computer because we want to get the design right. And then finally we act and we develop the code and test it. And then we can come back to visualize and refine it. But we spend a lot of time in the upper right corner and the right side of the diagram before we ever get to act, you know. And in some ways I'm like that in my private life too. I do a lot of planning before I take action. So I know some people might visualize, act, make some mistakes, and then figure out what to do next. I like to spend a lot of time planning and designing before I ever act. And that's part of my personality.
Beautiful. Thank you. Next up is Mark.
Yes, thanks for the discussion. I see myself more in the starting from the acts position from, say, a matter of necessity. I had to change my job because of health reasons, so I had to act because I was essentially getting sick. So I was then seeking to find, but I, visualizing multiple different options until that something then clarified, and then I was pretty good with explicating and designing the next steps. So I'm kind of from point of necessity starting forward. Certainly visualization is there, but easily I get distracted and have kind of different options. Once I have something concrete, I can then see myself pretty good then following the next steps and then designing the next stages. Then back to the beginning point of acting.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I very much agree with Jim's perspective on it, and the idea that you start with a vision, visualize, then you go to explicate, then correct me if I'm wrong, I think Jim said you also go to design, and then you go back to visualize again. And then this sets up a process, from what I see, that you can then start to take actions much more quickly within that process, so that it starts to speed up. So once you have that initial groundwork that is set, I look at, yes, initially you're starting with visualize, you're explicating, and then you're designing, and then you just want to come back to visualize again, and then you start acting, and then you can really start to move quickly on like very short iterations on making decisions, but you have a process in place. That's just the way I see it. I might be a little bit off. I have to fully think out the design aspect of it, but that's definitely where I see there's definitely that relationship between those two. And that's where I was getting a little bit confused with the idea of principles. You want to visualize something first, then set up a set of principles, and then design how you're going to, execute, and then act on that. So that's the way I was looking at it.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Next up, so what we're going to do is, if anybody else wants to share how this works in them, they're welcome to do that. Shelley's next. Shelley,
Hey,
go ahead.
yeah. So when you were talking with Adrian, I had some revelation in my brain, and I realized that I think I always start with a vision, like something will come to my brain, right? An idea or a goal or some thought is going to come here that I'm going to go towards. But many times what I'll do is I'll jump right to act. And I've realized over the last couple of years, I'm like, to your point, you sacrifice something, right? And I've never thought about it in that language before, but I've realized that a lot of times when I jump right to acting, I'm like, oh, I'm just going for the gusto. I'm just going to do it, you know? Then there's some fallout because I haven't thought through it well enough, right? And sometimes it's fine. It's like you're jumping in the car, you're going to the beach for the day. It's not a big deal. But other times there can be really serious consequences by not thinking through it. And I've been slowing myself down when I have that desire to just like jump in and do something with all this gusto and enthusiasm. I've been telling myself to stop and let's think about it. Let's get a plan together. Let's see, is it really going to work the way that you in your head see it's working if you just jump right in? And I've never been able to articulate it like that until now. So that's been very helpful. So thank you to you both.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Shelley. All right. If there is nobody else, John, go ahead. John, would you like to say something about this? Yeah.
One thing is something occurred to me that perhaps the function that you should start with is the one you least want to start with. Because when acting is your weak point, I could see, and I'm talking from my own experience, like I will be really good at designing. I will make the most incredible designs, you know, you've ever seen in order to avoid acting. But if you start with acting, even if that action is, you know, not too significant, it gets you past that unpleasantness barrier. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, that's always an interesting question. You know, do you lead with your strength or do you focus on your weakness, and what proportion and in what way? So that there's very elaborate strategies for that. And again, Ray Dalio, when we come to him, I think he has some very interesting points about that as well. But thanks, John. Great observation. Next up is Deborah.
Okay, I'll try to keep it simple then. So I wanted to use John's example of when he talks a lot about fitness and that sort of thing. So if we have, number one, visualization of ourselves in great shape and that sort of thing, that gives us a positive mindset. So that's one thing that makes that so powerful. And then we'll think, what evidence do I have that I achieved my goal to lose 20 pounds, for example, if that's what step one was. And it would be get on the scale. Do I weigh 20 pounds less or not? And then the next step is planning how I'm going to do it. I'm going to paddleboard. I'm going to find fun exercise. I'm going to work out with friends, journal, whatever. And then step 4 is really powerful because you have to reflect. Did it work? Did it not work? Why didn't it work? Why did it work? And then make an adjustment. So it's like a loop, and then you go back to the beginning. Anyway, it's just a simple way of doing it.
Thank you, Deborah. All right, if there is nobody else who wants to share, I'm going to go ahead and go to the OODA Loop. All right, so firstly, folks, I mean, this is just incredible. Just great feedback, and just lots of interesting stuff. I've a whole note, full of things, and look forward to taking to the next level. All right, and okay, now I'm very excited about this because OODA Loop is, I don't know, I'm going to take a little time to talk about John Boyd and the OODA Loop. It's one of my favorite things. So John Boyd, so firstly, if somebody's familiar with John Boyd and the OODA Loop, just say yes in the chat. So I know, but I'm just assuming that most people will not be, at least a significant number of people will not be familiar with him. So I'm presenting with that as a background. So John Boyd, and in any case, even if you're very familiar, it's always good to recount, the works of these amazing people. He had actually 3 different careers, 3 incredible careers. His first career, he was a fighter pilot. And during that career, he was known as 40 seconds, 40 seconds Boyd, because he had an open challenge to any other fighter pilot, saying that you choose any position and any speeds of the 2 aircrafts. In 40 seconds, I'll be behind you, shooting you down. Okay. And he won like 98% of the times. So, so that was his first career. His second career was in design of aircraft. So he's the father of F-16s, and he kind of radically changed the airplane design, because before him, the fighter aircrafts focused on power. Whereas what his point was that what you should really focus on is maneuverability. How quickly you can change your direction, speed, acceleration, so you can respond to situations. And the whole fighter aircrafts were completely redesigned as a result of that. But his greatest achievement is OODA Loop, which is a concept in military strategy, or how do you operate. And he was a lone outsider, just a independent, esoteric thoughts, completely out of the system. And Pentagon is a very structured, highly disciplined organization. And he ended up using his idea of OODA Loop to actually convince Pentagon to change their entire strategy. Because before him, now there are many people who worked along the same directions, but he was one of the most successful ones at that. But just one man changing the entire Pentagon system, I mean, that's huge. Before him, most people implicitly thought of war as attrition war. That what you do is that you become as strong as possible, have as much ammunition as possible, and then you just hit the enemy with everything you got and you destroy them. The result of that is this massive casualties on both sides. And he says, no, that's not a way of fighting. What you should do is that you should, his term was to operate within the OODA cycle of the enemy. It is, you have to disorient the enemy, dishearten the enemy, so that they pretty much stop before you have to really use kind of massive amount of force. So it's like your response time has to be much faster than the enemy. So let me illustrate that by talking about that. And what he did was that's one of the reasons why the military performance in the first Gulf War was dramatically different from the Vietnam War. When they wanted to go in, Schwarzkopf and Cheney insisted that they get John Boyd in to figure out how you should attack, because Saddam Hussein was all fortified in Baghdad, all fortified in Kuwait, which he had captured. And they were expecting kind of a normal fight where we would either go for Kuwait or we would go for Baghdad. And John Boyd said, do neither. He had this idea of left hook, which goes through the desert, which cuts off the communication between Baghdad and his troops in Kuwait, and then just pummels them so that their entire supply chain and the communications chain is broken. So they don't know what is going on, and they are completely separated out. And so by the time the forces showed up, the main problem they had is that like hundreds of Iraqis were just coming out with their hands up, trying to surrender, and they had to manage the surrender. So that's, it's a very effective way of operating. So that's one of the examples. Amongst the army, the generals, most of the army hated his ideas. The people who took them up were Marines, because they understand that they are always the kind of the tip of the spear. They always go into the most unpredictable situations, the toughest situations, and they immediately understood and embraced his ideas. And that's where it started, and then it spread across. So that's his, that's his history. What I'm saying here is not a very good, what I'm going to say here about the OODA loop is not a good, cannot possibly do justice to his work. What he did was that he also presented his ideas in a certain way. He refused to write them down as briefings because that could be easily put away and critiqued by his critics who were against him anyway. And he insisted on presenting it as presentations. And his presentations are actually available online. So I would very much recommend that you read the original presentations. They're just a few pages, probably some of, most effective few pages that have changed kind of military history. So I would recommend reading, doing this yourself. But I'm going to do a very quick version of it. Now, I want to step back. One of the reasons I'm very, very excited about, kind of talking about OODA Loop and Ray Dalio's principles is that they come at the problem from outside in. They're saying, I'm trying to win a war, or I'm trying to do great business achievements. How do I do it? That's their focus. It's not inside out. My focus has been inside out. Jung's focus is inside out. Their focus is outside in. They're saying, this is the outside effect that I need. What do I need to do for doing that? Okay. So let's start with the OODA loop. OODA loop starts with observation. So OODA stands for observation, which is which I have put it in action currently. Orientation. So you basically observe what is going on. You orient yourself, you decide, and you act. Okay. Now let's start with what is common, which is very easy. Both OODA loop and Ray Dalio systems, their two last steps are the same: design and act. So Boyd calls it decide and act, but his decision is basically, what plan should I execute? So it's the same thing as what I'm calling design, coming up with a plan of action involving people, time, and space. This is what is going to happen. So that's design. I call it design. Boyd calls it decide. Ray Dalio calls it plan. So that's kind of setting what you need to do, how, and the way in which you're going to do it. The next one is action, which is also common to both of those. So those two are the same for all these three cycles. And those are the end of all these three cycles, okay? I think that's very, I did not know that I would, I'd not thought of this before, but I think this is very big because those parts, so the entire complexity lies in the other two parts, okay? So for Boyd, observation is simply just taking in what happened. And his really complex step is that of orientation. So for example, when you look at his OODA loop, he has a sub-diagram for orientation. And the orientation diagram is like maybe an order of magnitude more complex than the entire cycle. That's where most of the action is taking place. So what you're actually doing is that you're taking in all the information. You're trying to gather all your intuitions. You're trying to compare it with everything else, all the ideas that you know. You're trying to explicate all the issues, and you're trying to form a final conclusion as a result of that. So I've put it at the edge of visualize and explicate, that orientation, because it is a combination of that. So it's basically your entire cognitive apparatus, including your intuition and your deliberation, working together to say, this is what is going on and this is what needs to be done. So orientation is the heart of the OODA loop. Observation, this is again one of the points that I have. I see observation, see, most people regard observation as passive. I look at it as a side result of action. So I see that we're fundamentally living creatures, we act, and we take observations in. So in that sense, you can put observation of John Boyd somewhere at the boundary of acting and visualizing, because that observation for him is also a little bit more complex than that. So that's what it is. It's the decide and act remains the same. Orientation pretty much captures lots of factors, and it is enormously complex. And I think separating it out as intuition and explication. But again, the points that both John made and some other people made, that visualize and explicate is not just a direct line. Okay, there is a lot of feedback loops going on. So there is this main line, and there is feedback loops, not only from one to one, but just for the next one, but also from the previous. So there is, with design, once you have come up with a design, you always check with your intuition. Does this make sense? So just like Jim was saying, Jim and Joe were saying that there are these loops going on between visualize, explicate, and design multiple times before you go to action. So there are all kinds of other kind of sub loops that are going on, because these are all faculties that we have. We can use them at any time, and we need to use them in conjunction with each other to do that. So in that sense, these loops are simplified versions of what needs to happen. So you need to have a goal, you need to make sure that it is fully explicated, fully makes sense. Then you have to have a plan for it, and you have to act. That's a simplified version. And the actual thing is going to be lots of little lines going back and forth between those things. I have to figure out how to represent them without, while keeping the simplicity. So that's a very quick take on the OODA loop. So let me open it up for questions just on OODA loop and the 4-function cycle. So mostly on OODA loop. So any questions, folks? So go ahead and type in exclamation mark if you have any questions or comments about the OODA loop. Now there may be, there are probably people here who know OODA loop better than I do. So if you want to say something about the OODA loop and John Boyd, this is the time to do it. So go ahead and type exclamation mark. Okay, Joe, go ahead.
Well, this is going to be maybe an unfair question, because I'm trying to figure out, like, how would you depict, multiple, and I'm going to use the word nodes, going back and forth between visualize and explicate or something along those lines.
It's not an unfair question. That's a very good question, and that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I just don't know how it's got to be hard. I'm trying to figure it out.
It's not hard. It's not hard, because this is very natural. These causalities going back and forth like that are very natural to organic processes. So for example, Louis Sullivan's art has a lot of that. So there are, you have kind of a large, like a simple way of doing that is to have bold lines going one way and little lines going the other way. Okay. And just make sure that the quantity, the thickness of them is such that you can focus on one or the other. So that it's very, it's fairly straightforward to do. And there are no unfair questions. Please ask all questions.
Thank you.
Next up is John. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess you can frame this as a question. I'm gonna make a comment, and you can say whether you agree with this or not. Yeah, I liked your introduction indicating what you called the 3 career phases of John Boyd, and starting with his experience as the fighter pilot and his contribution to aircraft design, and also then to military strategy. What I think is to me, what's fascinating about this is that John Boyd's real contribution was his model. And he declared that when he was in combat conflict scenarios, that was how he came to formulate this very abstract methodology for what you have to do and how you do it. And of course, his drive was, you have this methodology and you practice the methodology. And then when you're in the field and you've got to do something within 30 seconds or be dead, you can do it. And so he came up with the methodology. And then once he had the methodology, oh my gosh, I can apply this to aircraft design. This can be applied to military strategy. So the central vision or the central contribution was really the method or the concept.
Absolutely, that's beautiful. I fully agree with that. The OODA loop. I want to talk a little bit more about that. So in this sense, I think the OODA loop is the most powerful loop that I know, because it works within fractions of a second. It's actually originally designed, or originally Boyd came up with it as a fighter pilot. What do I need to do in order to be a great fighter pilot so that I can shoot people, shoot the other aircrafts down? Basically, I want to elaborate on one particular aspect of it, and that is his concept of operating inside the OODA loop of the enemy. You're observing, saying, okay, what is going on? You're orienting and say, okay, this is what is going on, deciding this is what I need to do, and you're acting. Now, if you do this, go through this cycle faster than the enemy, see what the implications are. That you have acted by the time while the enemy is trying to orient themselves to the last thing that you have done, you have already acted, which completely changes their observational base. And they start to orient again. By the time they are 10% of orientation, of figuring out what is going on, you've acted again. That has completely changed their situation. They're saying, oh my God, now this has happened. So what does this mean? By the time they're halfway to answering that question, you've acted again. So they're basically paralyzed. They're unable to act. So you are able to act. And that's the heart of it. So if you can go faster. And the beautiful thing about this is that it is designed with that small time frame, but you can apply it to larger and larger time frames. You can look at kind of movement of troops. You can look at, so for example, let's say when you're talking about the Gulf War, we are not talking about the seconds. This is happening over a longer period of time. So there are things operating at a small, so there are like multiple OODA cycles going on of different time value. All right, next, but thank you, John. That was a great addition. I think that is the heart, and it's the same angle. And he used the same thing in order to sell the idea to the Pentagon. I mean, I remember one of his descriptions. He went in. He was a consultant, and they had come up with a new aircraft design, and he was hired as a consultant. And he had an interview. He said the general who was in charge of this, actually, there were two. There was a general who was in charge of it, and his deputy, who was also a general. Okay, so he talked to this second general, and the general said, "Send me a report of your findings about this aircraft." He says, "No, I will not. I will come and talk to you. I'll be happy to talk to you." He says, no, you're supposed to give a report. It doesn't say whether it is an oral report or written report. So I'll give it to you orally. It says, okay. So he comes in and he says, so what do you think about the design? He says, if I deliberately wanted to screw up this design, he used a stronger word, as best as I possibly could, I could not have done a better job. Okay. So like, because normally what happens is that these hiring of consultants is just a way of kind of protecting their behinds, of saying, okay, we also talked to the consultant and they also agreed with the same thing. And here he was just, and So the guy, and nobody talks to generals like that. So he was completely taken aback. And then he said, well, can you go and tell the same thing to the general who is in charge of this? He said, sure. And so this is again a way of going under the, operating inside the OODA cycle of the other people, because their entire grasp of what a consultant is going to do, what this process is, was completely thrown off by this guy coming and saying that this is not even the thing that it should be. So it's a great example. Thank you again, John. Next up is Jim.
Yeah, one of the disciplinaries that I've been exposed to the OODA Loop is personal self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
Walking down a dark alley, being aware of everything around, whatever, that kind of thing. So, and unfortunately, I've never had to employ it in that situation, but I have employed it in a defensive driving situation. So driving down the road, this is a specific case where it's like a 2-lane road with a turn lane, and there's a car in the turn lane. He decides that he's going to turn directly in front of me to get into a driveway on the other side of the road, and suddenly realizes that that's a bad idea and just stops directly in front of me. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I'm observing all the time driving, right? So the whole point of OODA Loop is you're always aware. And then I see this happen. So now I have to orient really quickly. Is there enough space to stop? Is the lane to the right of me clear? Is the lane to the left of me clear? And have to make a decision within a fraction of a second. And so as I'm seeing the person in the passenger seat in the car in front of me with this wide-eyed look and their hands braced against the side of the car, preparing for impact, I'm able to steer to the left into effectively oncoming traffic where there's a gap, steer back around into my lane on the other side of the car and keep going. So that's the OODA Loop in, 1 second, 1 or 2 seconds of time elapsed from moment of understanding what was happening to being able to act on it and avoid an accident.
Wonderful, wonderful. Great example. I'm going to talk about Ray Dalio's 5-step process and related to this. I like the variety of examples. Ray Dalio's is done in a business context. He is the CEO of Bridgewater, and he has used techniques like this in his company for about 30 years. So thousands of people have used this. They're also very explicit about using these kind of tools. So people actually say, okay, what's your goal? Where are you on each of these places on cycles? Also, he's very cognizant about the fact that some people are good at certain things and not so good at other things. So he's also particular about putting together teams where the team as a whole has all the strengths, and people know which of the person has which of the strengths. So they defer to each other and work with each other to produce a good net result. So the 5-step process is, the first step is goals. So he says, set ambitious goals, because if you don't do that, what are you doing? So setting ambitious goals, that's the first step. And that's in the visualize. I put it in the visualize. The next 2 steps are very much of explication or deliberation process. So this second step is to face the problems, identify the problems, don't hide the problems. If you have set ambitious goals, by their own nature, if they're ambitious enough, you're going to face problems. You're not going to know what to do. That comes with the territory of setting ambitious goals. So the question is, are you going to face the problems? And that takes courage. Takes courage, honesty, to say, okay, hey, look, here is the problem. Okay. The third is to get to the root causes of the problem. That is pure mental work, trying to think, okay, what is the root cause of this problem? So I put both of them in the blue area, the explicate or deliberate area. And the last two steps are the same. He calls it planning and execution. I call it design and act. John Boyd calls it decide and act. All of them. So first you plan, which is the result of, which is the same as design. Say, this is what needs to be done. And then you do execution. Now, I think the point, it's very interesting that he kind of evaluates people, the organization, everybody evaluates everybody else on which of these things that they are particularly strong on. And they use that in order to not only to form teams, but to operate while they're operating on projects. I also like the fact that this tool, John Boyd's tool, works on like fraction of seconds. This tool works at the level of years, several years. So it's a very good kind of a combination of different cycles to compare what I'm doing with the 4-function model. So let me open it up to questions. I recommend Ray Dalio's book. We went through it. It's called Principles. We went through it. I recommend it very highly because it's a very this worldly, very honest look at human beings, their faculties. Internally, they use cognitive functions of Carl Jung in order to figure all of this stuff out. So it has kind of the same base that I'm using as well. They are much better at getting things done in the world than I am. So they will have you'll probably learn something about Ray Dalio, especially about the planning cycles, or especially the planning cycles, I would say. And I think he's done a very good job of talking about these other two parts, about facing of problems and figuring out root causes of problem. I don't think it is kind of off the charts, but facing of problems within an organizations across multiple peoples, I think they have done something really, really good on that. So that's my kind of quick look at Ray Dalio's ideas. So any comments, any questions on that? All right, anybody? All right, so then let me open it up now for any kind of general comments and questions. So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to say something, if you have any questions, any comments. Jim, go ahead.
So earlier, Jonathan talked a little bit about kind of the spiral nature and additional dimensions, which brought to mind to me an interesting visual, which, we've talked a little bit about how it isn't always just a circle through the fork. It might be a shorter loop through a subset of things, and then, or it could be a tighter loop that expands to a larger loop, or a larger loop that then advances to a tighter loop depending on the field. And if you think of it as a two-dimensional model, but then you add the time dimension, the path that this line, so to speak, takes becomes a helix, right? A spring shape, that where the diameter of the spring might change. It might compress to small and then become big again. It might become small and big. And so that's kind of an interesting way to visualize it in 3 dimensions, where time is the 3rd dimension in this case.
Absolutely, I fully agree. That's beautiful. And I'm going to figure out a way. I'm trying to keep all my illustrations as simple as possible so we can talk about it easier. But I'm going to have, I'm a very visual person and all of that. So for example, let me just show you in the way in which Ray Dalio draws it. It's like this. Let me see here. So Ray Dalio draws it like this. So like that. So these are all, each of them is this loop, and then it kind of ends with, and it just continues like that. You keep on doing the next thing. But I like the 3-dimensional idea. Next up is Shelley.
Shrikant, so I'm thinking about this from very personally, just because it's really open. I'm realizing I'm a very intuitive person in how I go about getting stuff done. I've not ever broken anything down like this. I've not ever looked at it in terms of systems or processes. I just do it, and it's instinctual to me, right? So I'm evaluating this in that kind of a personal level, right? And for me, I'm thinking, like, if I was going to pick up a book and read about this, right? One of the things that would really interest me would be, again, going back to what we were talking about the sacrifices that are made within starting in different places. To me, it would be really beneficial to have that clearly laid out. And I'm not saying include this in part of your design or anything. I'm really talking about when you begin to write on how to apply this for different people. It would just be good to know if you're going to start with ACT, or if you're going to start with Explicate, here are the things that might be missing that you want to consider as you're applying this. For me, I'd love to know that. Anyway, that's just some of my comments.
No, that's great. I mean, the good thing is that there is a lot of work on this that has been done under the general area of kind of psychological functions. Myers-Briggs tries to do a lot of this. I prefer the kind of traditional Jungian way of looking at it, which is far more flexible. I think the Myers-Briggs tends to be, they're trying to get to an answer very quickly without fully grasping the complexity of human beings and all the different ways in which we are different. But they are kind of, what they're trying to do is very similar to that. In order to do this well, a couple of things are necessary, and very few people actually have that. Firstly, you have to be honest about yourself and about other people. So firstly, you have to acknowledge the differences. So there are some people who will refuse to acknowledge differences amongst people. Second, there are another kind of people who say all differences are okay, and it's wrong to say that there are any consequences to the differences, but there are consequences to the differences. So kind of saying that because you're operating in a certain way, you're going to be good at some things and bad at some things. Accepting of that fact, I think, is important. So I'm definitely going to do that. I'm just doing it in a very systematic way. I'm trying, because there are so many things going on here, okay? There is the interaction. We are enormously complex beings. And what I'm trying to do here is to put very simple terms down so we can start talking about it. The actual interaction is quite complex. As John was pointing out, there are all kinds of feedback loops going on. In addition to that, there is all this play between kind of conscious and unconscious that is going on. There is kind of things where, like, if you're strong at something, there is something else that you need. There is like in order to kind of complete yourself. So there is all kinds of actions like that. And I think Jung has kind of tried to get at that through the idea of archetypes. So then there is the idea of Jung, which MBTI runs with a lot, of saying having the first function, the second function, and the third function. There is a lot of merit in that as well. So it's kind of trying to put it all together and just talking to people. I'm just and I'm doing this on the fly. Okay, I'm just telling you the best I know. And then I'm trying to get feedback. And Shelley, I mean, the feedback of you that you gave me today on everything that you've said is very, very valuable, because you're very honest in kind of describing your strengths and weaknesses. For example, what you're saying is that you kind of have the tendency of starting with the vision and then trying to rush to action. And what you've discovered over time, that doing kind of more of explication and more of design improves. And once, improves the net performance. There are people who have exactly the same, exactly opposite problem. I think it was Adrian who was describing. They start with the vision, but they will go into kind of almost endless planning and explication without actually getting to action. And what that does is that they do not get the feedback that is needed. You're not going to be able to come up with a vision which is going to be right. Okay, perfect. You are going to have to test it out. That is your kind of best view, and you have to test it out. So there are kind of, all kinds of positives and negatives. So for example, the kind of approach that you're talking about, you're going to have actions which are not that successful. So there are going to be some actions that are not going to work out. A person who has kind of carefully thought out might have been able to avoid some of those actions. At the same time, a person who spends too much time on just explicating and planning without doing enough things is not getting the feedback that they need from the action. So they may not even discover some of the issues that they would start discovering only when they start doing things. So it's a very delicate dance. Go ahead.
And explaining that could be so beneficial for people. And you have done it in such a way that you give a lot of ways to take the information in, right? So you've got the visual, you've got a diagram, and then words to go along with it, right? And I think it could be incredibly beneficial to help people jump in and evaluate themselves from the person you're talking about that has no concept of self-evaluation, and being able to say, hey, I know I've got stuff to work on like we all do, to the person who's already been doing that all along and just wants another layer of self-improvement in their life. So anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shelley. Jeff, you're next.
Hi, Shrikant. I just took a moment and I tried to write down what I was trying to say. And so there's no reason for me to say it. I've written it better than I could say it. So I want to offer
Jeff,
you the opportunity there.
Jeff, could you read it out? Because then everybody will be able to engage, because I want people to actually hear it, because it's difficult in a
Sure.
good combination. Go ahead.
All right. So it's my experience with myself and others, both individuals and groups that I work with, that all four of these functions are always interacting in a living, dynamic iteration of often very interdependent ideas and designs. Like they're nearly inseparable in a way. And we might be aware of liking to start at one place, for example, a vision. But we might actually be somewhat unaware of how often the fact that we've arrived at another place, acting that has produced entirely unexpected results, motivated us to go back to that vision. So for example, my experience with sometimes generating very disappointing results, and some things going on in our environment today are examples of things that have generated very disappointing results with entirely unintended consequences, have sometimes provoked us to think about really different things we could do that might lead us even to reprioritizing some of our core values and to refining our vision and editing some of our even core principles that might lead us to reconsidering key components of our planning that might lead us back to refining and adding to our vision, which ultimately really inspires us and energizes us to initiate bold actions. But this time, more wisely, as an experiment where we will focus on closely noticing the results, both anticipated and unanticipated, and seeking to learn the best things from the experience of implementing this plan and in the results, and then again, attempt to revisualize what we think we're trying to achieve. So all four functions are always interacting in a living, dynamic iteration of often interdependent ideas and designs.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. That was great.
I apologize for the complexity of it, but that's my experience of life.
Don't apologize. I thank you for the complexity of it. And this is a great combination, kind of, just writing it out and then speaking it out. I think it works very well. What I want to say is that diagrams are designed exactly for this, because a visual diagram, all the four things are there at the same time. That's why I use diagrams. That it is reminding you is don't forget the other functions. You may be doing something right now. So it's actually, the way I see the diagram is this is all four things flowing into one another. There is actually more complex. I have to figure out how to show a more complex flow at this large level, not just the cycles. I want to be able to kind of show it. So what Jeff is saying, what John is saying, what Jim is saying, that the flows are much more, they're back and forth between that. Part of it is just captured by thinking of it as a diagram, and you are just kind of moving your eye across the diagram, and it is your movement of the eye across the diagram back and forth, which is very, very easy, is how you need to actually be doing this. You can draw it on this one and you can follow the line, but you can use your eye too, of just moving back and forth. When you're thinking about something, you can just put the diagram in front of you. Again, and for me, this works very well. And I can say, okay, I'm now looking at this. So what is happening here? Now, what about the design of this? And where am I over there? And then you would certainly, you kind of at the back of the mind, you will say, oh, I have not paid attention to kind of, this is not clear enough. I need to explicate it. So you go back to explication. So visual diagram is particularly good at keeping this entire, all four things in mind. And I'm trying to put kind of visual elements that kind of encourage that movement. I'm not that good. Like, for example, like Leonardo Da Vinci, okay, this is a slight diversion, but it is well worth it, okay, because it is an example of what good visual can do. So Leonardo, when he's trying to explain his, he did not care to explain to anybody else, but he wrote it in, in mirror writing on his notebooks, which he never showed to any, didn't kind of publish or anything like that, kept it to himself, partly because he would be burnt at stake for half the things he was saying. His idea is that he says, look, my paintings or my drawings are like prison. I want attention to firstly keep moving, and as it moves, more things should become interesting. So I'll give you an example. There is one of my favorite paintings in the Louvre is a Madonna on the rocks. There are four figures, and you can start by paying attention to one of the figures, let's say Mary. And then the way the visuals are is that the eye naturally moves to the next figure, that of Jesus. So, and in doing so, you can see this kind of mother-child bond, the feeling of a mother towards her child. Then you have, you kind of take in what Jesus is, and then you go from Jesus to John the Baptist, and you can see the relationship between somebody who is grateful to other person who has been the harbinger for them. You kind of get that. Then from there you go to his mother, and from there when you come back, by the time you come back to Mary, your context of your eye having moved over all of that is so different that you see Mary in a completely different light, and you're surprised. So like one of the common descriptions that people have when looking at Leonardo's art is that they say it's mysterious. And this is the reason why it's mysterious. He makes your eye go in a certain way to make all these connections, form all those ideas in your head. So by the time you come back to the same thing, it looks different. And then you go to the next one, and you keep doing that because it's just so fascinating that every time you're doing something, that is good visual. So my diagrams are very, very primitive right now, but that's the direction in which I hope to go. I don't expect to reach anywhere there, but at least some way in that. Next up is Joe.
So there are actually, while everybody was talking, there was two models that had come to mind that I'll do at some point. I'm going to map onto this. Everybody talked about strengths and weaknesses, but I think you can actually put together a SWOT analysis within this diagram as well. And then I think also that the idea, because that really focuses on both internal and external factors. So I think that actually will map in nicely. There's also a book I read many years ago that I need to start following, which was the Getting Things Done method. And if we're talking about it based on an individual level, the idea of, it's kind of like a OODA loop, and it collect, process, organize, plan, and do. So that also has a similar type of approach that would probably fit really nicely into this model, and be interesting to see how both of those could work as well. I just wanted to make that comment.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll work on those. Next up is Jim.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what Jeff was saying, and I think the level with which the different steps in the diagram, or parts of the diagram, interact and the interplay between them depends a lot on the context or what's being performed or what the goals are. Like, for example, if it's personal growth or physical fitness, it makes a lot of sense to just go straight from a vision to action. Just get off the couch, go for a walk. While you're walking, you can visualize, and then you can refine your program as you're in action. So the design and the explication actually becomes part of the process in the context of the action itself. But if you're building a house, you don't just walk in the middle of the field and start nailing boards together if you want to pass inspection and meet building codes, right? So there's a lot of visualization design that has to happen before you act. And if you change your mind in the middle, it's expensive. I know, because I built a house. So it's just a thought.
Yeah, no, that's great. So folks, any ideas you have, either comments like this, or if you have your own alternate versions of doing the diagrams, if you have ideas about how do you kind of make things flow, just send it to me at 52livingideas@gmail.com. This feedback is all this feedback is just amazing. I'm so thrilled, and I'm so honored that such amazing people come and talk about these ideas, and I'm very excited about it. So I'm going to continue doing this. I have some amazing new series of meetups starting up. I have Angela, who has done a PhD on studying polymaths and is writing a book on that. She's going to be doing a regular series every other Sunday starting November. I have a couple other things which are almost fixed, which are going to be very, very exciting. So I hope to be able to announce them in a couple of days. So looking forward to all of that. And thank you very much, everybody. And have a great Sunday. See you folks soon. Bye.